When I'm talking about regenerative principles, really what I'm saying is we're using the model of how nature works and applying it to how we design things. Now, if we're designing a food and farming system and it's a centralized, globalized model, that's not how nature works. Nature works in place, adapting to place in a small, localized way. Really, what I would love to be pushing for is a relocalization and a kind of bioregional way of building our supply chains, putting the power back in the hands of the people and the farmers, and trying to get citizens to take responsibility and try and encourage buying from their local farmers. So, and a lot of the wilderculture work, which I can get into if you're interested in it, is around prototyping what that bioregional work could look like.
The very first episode of this podcast was an interview with Caroline Grindrod, and it remains one of the most insightful discussions I think I've published around understanding what regenerative agriculture actually is. It's a difficult thing to label and put into a box because it's so interconnected. Whole natural systems functioning together, and with people, and with the systems in society. All of this complexity is what makes the challenge so big when it comes to a wide-scale transition across farmlands. It's all so much more than just the practices on the fields. I'm delighted that Caroline returns now to add a new depth to all of this and catches up with how things have been developing within her work and in life in general. I'm Helen Fisher. This is We Are Carbon. And I'd like to quickly highlight a special 14-minute compilation episode that also features Caroline's wisdom. Carbon builds life. It makes a great introduction to the themes that we explore through We Are Carbon. You'll find the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to keep up to date. Enjoy the conversation. Hi Caroline, thank you so much for coming back and joining us again. It feels like such a long time, and I think it was a few years since we've spoken and had you here on the podcast. I know that you are up to so much. You're really embedded in the regeneration of not just the land, but of people and society, and I really would love to dive back into what you're working on, what you've been learning over the last few years, and maybe if we just start off with a sort of reintroduction to yourself and a summary of where your mind's at today.
Great, thanks Helen, and thanks for inviting me. It's absolutely wonderful to be back, and I think I was one of the first anyway of the podcast, wasn't I? So it's lovely to be back, and lots has happened. It seems to be a never-ending whirlwind, and just as a quick, I'll try not to take too long, as a quick recap of my kind of background and work. I come from a background in bridging farming and environment, I suppose, and started off training in environmental conservation and then married into farming and then became very passionate about that. I'd also been involved in farming from a young age as well. But eventually, married into farming, took on a tenancy in the Lake District, Yew Tree Farm, which is a very well-known, beautiful farm in the Lake District, and then eventually moved on from that and then started to develop what I now think of as my regenerative offering, which has been a kind of a spiraling path, as I now understand it, through different stages of ways of thinking and doing. I now have a foot in a few different camps. One, my overarching consultancy offering is Roots of Nature, and I work with a whole range of different projects under that banner, and that's where I develop the thinking around my regenerative offerings, and the kind of feedback from all the different aspects of my work comes into there, and that's where I kind of think about the different ways of framing things, so I have a whole range of projects, including working with some big corporates in there, but also developing the Roots Regeneration program, which is now actually going to be in a separate company and offering, and as I say, refining my thinking and the kind of frameworks I use across all of my different work happens under that banner. And then with my husband and another partner, we founded a community interest company called Wilderculture, which is taking up a lot of my time these days. I'm very passionate about that work, and that started with trying to answer the question, how do we do this regenerative agriculture stuff in the uplands? Because that's where I've lived all my life. That's where I'm passionate about working and trying to help. And it has a very unique set of complexities, shall we say, around working in those areas and those landscapes. So under the banner of Wilderculture, we work with a wide range of projects with a lot of scale. I work with some very, very large estates, and we've been doing that for nearly 10 years. So that's a lot of my work. And then I have a foot with Primal Meats. I founded a company called Primal Meats, which I'm still involved in, which is supporting amazing farmers doing regenerative stuff, basically to supply their meat to amazing customers who want regenerative products. So really kind of understanding that end of the chain of production, really, the kind of marketing and sales and product end of the sale, that chain of production, which is important to know. And then Roots to Regeneration, which has now become its own organisation with Claire Hill, is another big part of my focus these days. That is our kind of showcase flagship 2-year amazing regenerative transition programme for farmers and professionals, which is where we've taken our best thinking, our best work of how this stuff lands in the UK, what we've learned about it so far, and we handhold farmers and professionals through the process of transitioning farms to learn from the farmer's perspective all of the aspects of designing their farm, having the mindset shift required, learning all the technical aspects, and really kind of creating a network and community around that transition. And for the professionals who are in food and farming, learning regenerative agriculture through the lens of working with a farmer in that transition, and then also learning that regenerative is so much more than just regenerative farming, and that those principles can be applied to their own workplace and their own industry, so that we can change the whole system and not just have amazing farmers doing amazing things, but also have amazing companies supporting those farmers and also working in a very different way to support the next phase of what's coming, hopefully, in how we look after the planet and operate as people. So, I think that is probably enough of a summary.
It's fantastic. I love the way that you weave it together, because I understand it. My mind is like all over the place in different projects all the time. And I feel that need, like it's kind of an ecosystem. They add bits to one another. They focus on different areas. And it comes down to that need to shift the mindset, not just what we do. I think that is something that shines through in the work and the way that you approach things. I would be interested to hear a little about how you've changed your focus over the last few years in terms of we spoke, and I think you were working with a lot of corporate companies as part of this bigger kind of offering that you were doing. Do you still do that? Is that something that is still important to your work?
It was a really important piece of my evolution, and I'm really glad that I got involved in doing it. And I'm not really particularly looking to take on those sorts of projects. I'm not saying no forever. At the moment, I'm not really heavily involved in many of those projects, but the learnings from that has been absolutely crucial to thinking about how do we impact the whole system. So that's one of the reasons that my focus changed from just thinking we can just go in and help farmers to understanding that actually farmers on their own can't do this. What we need is citizens that understand what change is needed, and we need organisations and the people that the farmers are supplying to be doing things in a very different way. Otherwise, we need governance, and we need policy, and everything. The whole system needs to be changed. And of course, that sounds ridiculously overwhelming and impossible, but actually, when you start to think about the fact that we could work through one of the regenerative principles that I teach is nodal actions. So where are those little nodes in those systems that mean that we can start to impact the whole system change? And with Roots Regeneration, that's where we're focused. Is half of the group are farmers and often pioneering, or will become pioneering farmers, but the other half of the group are people from the food and farming system in a range of different roles, and non-farming, not directly farming. Some are bridging both, actually. Some have got a farm and are working in a profession. But the idea is that they come and learn deeply about the process of regenerative farming, and then understand those principles of how we can use natural systems as a kind of metaphor for design in any aspect of life. So we're designing our own lives, I'm trying to create a regenerative life for myself and our family. Regenerative businesses, all of the businesses that I run now, I'm using regenerative principles to design how I operate the businesses, including working with my husband's building business. So absolutely nothing to do with agriculture. And then, ultimately, if we can reduce the impact of all organizations so that they're, better for the people involved, they're place-based and, and regenerating from place to some degree, then, and giving back more than they take, then we're going to end up with a whole system that's functional and knitted together and self-supporting. So that's the ultimate idea. So yeah, the corporates, I think, from the farming lens, that was where I was generally involved in trying to sort of develop training programs for big companies and retailers who wanted to try and influence the farming methods under their watch. And hugely helpful working with those types of farmers, because they're not necessarily the normal farmers that I work with who are on the doorstep saying, we're ready to do this, we want to change. These are people that maybe aren't as convinced. And it could be that down the road that this stuff is being imposed upon them to some degree. So it's a whole different worldview that we're working with there. But hugely helpful to understand how to help people shift from any different worldview. And that's been a big part of developing our kind of theory of change, which underpins all of my work. But what's happened, I think, in the regen movement is that, and I can dive into the levels of regenerative agriculture a bit more if it's useful, but there's different degrees to which people can engage with regeneration. And some of it is very just practical. Let's learn a few practices at the bottom level. And that can just be, something that can be very simply measured, like doing no-till, doing regenerative grazing. And that might get you some benefits. But then there's the kind of regenerative stuff that I'm involved in, which involves thinking differently and designing differently and all aspects of how things knit together as wholes. That's a very different world, and that's not being picked up with this big drive towards regenerative agriculture. They're adopting the easiest entry point, which is possibly a good thing, but at the same time, then because they've got such a big budget and a big voice around this stuff, then it becomes understood by the wider public that is what regenerative agriculture is. It's just all it is soil health. All it is just adopting some practices. When actually true regeneration at a higher level is a very different thing, and it's a much deeper process. So, and that's what I teach and where we work in that. So, I guess one of the reasons that I was moving away from working with the corporates is in response to that, is that it's being slightly greenwashed and certainly being picked up by some very big companies who have a history of doing some very degenerative things. And they're not really understanding what it is. So we wanted to sort of set our stall out and say, we work in this more systemic way with regeneration. So, yeah, I guess that's been where I am now, is that's the area I work at, those higher levels, I suppose.
Yeah, it sounds like routes to regeneration. People are coming to you. They're open to learn. They're wanting to learn rather than coming from the other direction and saying you need to do things differently. And that is a very different place to be at. I very much applaud what you're doing. I think that it's complicated, but is essentially what's needed to kind of push things forward. We can't just keep taking the easy route, because things are really bad when we think of the state of everything on the whole. So yeah, those changes of any level are good, to change the practice, moving in the right direction, that is good. But it also adds this kind of challenge of, are we accepting that that's enough? And maybe we need both alongside one another. People on that grand scale, making those practice changes, reducing chemicals, supporting the soil, that's good. But until we can think about how we think about the relationships and the connections and the system at large, maybe we're not making the progress we need. I think it is really interesting to see those two things evolving side by side. in terms of the consumer perspective on this, I think that there has been huge recognition of this term regenerative agriculture, and I think that it's a good thing and a bad thing in equal measure. It's not necessarily selling the right message. Do you feel that the products in the supermarkets are benefiting at this time? Are we gaining anything from this regenerative movement in terms of the food supply on the shelves?
Well, there's a lot to dig into there, isn't there? And yeah, that is at the heart of the problem, isn't it? Is that if you actually take a more systemic level of working with regenerative agriculture, then really what we're doing in that level, and what we do in roots regeneration, is we're saying that not just the farmer has to go way beyond just adopting a couple of practices, and they have to rethink their farming system. They have to redesign their farming system in order to make it work. And the analogy that I use is, a farm is a whole system. It's made up of nested systems of the soil system, the plant system, the animal system, and their farmed ecosystem, which includes them and their mindset. And if you simply go into a kind of a farm that's stacked up in favour of production, like a kind of really commercially minded dairy farm, then you're going to have soil health that's probably not very alive and functional. It's probably quite compacted. And then you're going to have plants that are bred for taking up soluble nutrients like slurry and an artificial fertilizer, and are very highly productive when they get all their fertility needs met, and they're well hydrated, and they're not in drought. That all works perfectly. And then you've got cows that can digest those forages like ryegrass and clover, because they're able to take up, when they're when they're growing well, they are very high in protein and energy and very digestible. And then the cows are, bred specifically to take up those types of forages in that way. And then they produce extremely high volumes of milk on that basis. So that whole nested system is stacked up in terms of production. And that works fine as long as all the different elements of that are all right. If we're not in drought, or fertilizer doesn't cost too much, or we don't mind that our cows are not really reaching a very old age and they're just productive machines, and the soil is emitting carbon and degrading, that it works in terms of production, but it doesn't necessarily work for some of those other aspects. But it can be financially quite profitable, and it can certainly produce a lot of food. But if you try and take a system like that and shift it to regenerative agriculture, and you just think that it's about practices, so all you do is you come in like one of the big companies that's just saying, all you need to do is just do no-till, all you need to do is just do some tall grass grazing, and you come in without thinking about that whole system, and you let your rotations stretch out to 30 days, then the grasses that you've got, the soil that you've got, doesn't support that system, and then everything goes to seed and becomes undigestible by that cow. The milk tanks, that it basically doesn't produce anymore. The animals will be extremely unhappy on that mature forage, and then it will be declared a failure. So the difference between adopting a practice, which is what's being tried to be brought in by some of the big companies as a tick box type approach, and helping farms transition to a whole system approach, which requires thinking about rehabilitation of the soil, thinking about changing the swads, thinking about breeding and selecting for animals that can manage on a better range of plant species, and thinking about designing an ecosystem that has supporting habitats to regulate pests and disease, and changing the mindset of the farmer. That is the whole system approach to change. That's an incredibly different approach. And the problem is, if you promote adopting a few practices as what regenerative agriculture is, then you undermine people taking seriously this more deeper, richer approach to changing people towards regenerative. So I think in some respects, I used to think, it's fine. The two things can work alongside. And to some degree, there'll be some farms, there's no harm in just adopting a few regenerative practices and not thinking differently. But if then they doggedly tell you that everything else is nonsense, then it can undermine other people's work. So I think there's a challenge there, because the people that are saying that that's all regenerative agriculture is about have a lot of money and a lot of influence. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And then they can, to your other point, then they can come in and say, any farm that's produced food because they did some tall grass grazing, or because they did these 5 things that mean they're regenerative, tick box style, can then go into an international supply chain with a regenerative stamp on it. Well, when you start to engage with the higher levels of regenerative agriculture, you realise that regeneration isn't just about that farm, it's about all of the systems involved. And the whole point, the whole globalized food system is inherently not using regenerative principles, because regenerative, nature, which is essentially when I'm talking about regenerative principles, really what I'm saying is we're using the model of how nature works and applying it to how we design things. Now, if we're designing a food and farming system and it's a centralized, globalized model, that's not how nature works. Nature works in place, adapting to place in a small, localized way. So everyone pushing for the need for certification is really coming from this place of, we want to sell into a global market. When really what my big aha moment was that, well, okay, that maybe is a little bit like, if we're accepting globalization as the way that it's always going to be, then maybe it is better to buy from a regenerative label than not, even though that's not really seeming to become too much of a thing yet. But really, you're just going to be buying products that are just done a little bit less bad. They're not really truly regenerative. The whole system of that farm isn't going to be regenerative. It's not going to be carbon neutral, and also, improving habitats, improving the welfare of the animals, improving biodiversity. Like, it's very unlikely that tick box is going to be showing you that whole system, regeneration, which is what we're trying to push for. It might be just building soil health, or maybe enhancing water, or it's very unlikely to be doing all of those different things. And the need for that label only comes on the back of the fact that you've accepted globalization as the solution. Really, what I would love to be pushing for is a relocalization and a kind of bioregional way of building our supply chains. And so that's where my focus has shifted is, okay, I've learned lots working with those companies, but now we need to be pushing for putting the power back in the hands of the people and the farmers, and trying to get citizens to take responsibility and try and encourage buying from their local farmers. So, and a lot of the wilderculture work, which I can get into if you're interested in it, is around prototyping what that bioregional work could look like.
Yeah, I would love to get into that a little bit. I think that this idea of, okay, let's not fix the system, but let's recreate something that is built on a model that is inspired by nature, is kind of replicating nature. We are nature. It's almost going a little indigenous in the way that we connect to the place and connect to the way that the food is grown. It transforms us as individuals as well, and it builds relationship. That I can see that huge contrast between trying to say, how do we get the right label in the supermarket to educate the consumer? So when they're going around that supermarket, they have something to look out for. That's so difficult because it's so confusing and conflicting. And we have things like low carbon beef, which might sound good to somebody that's worried about the climate, but actually isn't regenerative in its production. So I think that what you're pushing for is beautiful. It's wonderful because it uplifts the human and our health, which is really so important to our food supply. How is that food healing us? How is the system and the connections within it fulfilling our lives? Ultimately, that vitality of just being alive, being human. There's so very much that underpins that is far and beyond what that globalization can provide. I think that it's a wonderful kind of opportunity for us to learn about some of that then from you, in terms of there must be a vast amount of challenge within these experiences that you have to go, right, well, how can we localize? How can we think, connect to place, create food systems, encourage citizens to be part of that and to support local food? So anything you can kind of offer us in terms of the themes that you've seen that have arisen from that, it would be wonderful to hear.
Sure. And I think because such a big focus over the last 6 months has been around building out our wilderculture vision for the next phase of our work, and that's all about that exact bioregional approach. And so wilderculture is, as I said, dedicated to kind of the marginal upland areas. So the Lake District where I am, Scottish Highlands, West Highlands and Islands, Southern Upland Scotland, Wales, anywhere that's got hills and a cultural heritage that's associated with hill farming is kind of where we would engage. And we've got a lot of expertise. We work with currently over 200,000 acres of upland land in different forms. So, and some very large estates right down to some sort of crofting scale. And my own regenerative vision for our life is on a croft on the Isle of Lismore. So it's all fractal scale. It's the same principles, the same way of designing, just different scales, right up to the biggest farms I work with, which are, nearly, or some of them, the whole estate is over 100,000 acres. So, but it's exactly the same way that you design. Just you take your context, your unique context, and then you understand the land, you understand the people, you understand the economic needs, and then you design for that uniqueness. So we've got a lot of experience in sort of working with farms, and in the uplands we've developed what's called the integrated landscape design, the wilderculture integrated landscape design, which is the wild map process. And so we've kind of, if you think about big upland landscapes, there's a huge amount of controversy all the time about what should we do with the uplands. Should it be all rewilded because it's low production, or should we continue to do sheep farming? Is it sheep wrecking? Or should we protect and restore it and specifically manage for a habitat, or plant trees for carbon, or something specific to an outcome, And of course, we've got a long history, particularly in upland areas, of money coming in through government or other mechanisms, and then huge areas of land being shifted to that new thing at the expense of something else. Because in any land management, you can't shift it to managing for orchids without losing a woodland that might be good for some other woodland bird. There's a trade-off no matter what you do with a landscape. So if we rewilded everything, then we would lose the food production potentially, or most of it. And we'd also lose really, really important fragments of protected habitats, because if you're allowing an environment to be self-willed and dynamic, which I'm totally for in the right place, then you will, by its nature, you can't protect and manage a specific species or habitat. You have to let it just either disappear or a new one to appear. So it's dynamic. And some of those species and habitats are really rare and really important, so we have to include those. And then similarly, we lose food if we manage for either just habitats or rewilding. Then we essentially then become reliant on food produced in other places. And, I'm very much not of the mindset that we should intensify in arable areas or production areas so that we can give back to nature in other areas. There's so much wrong with that in many levels. And it's not truly sustainable. It's not a long-term plan, because if you continue to degrade soil and you're poisoning water courses that are shared across large landscapes, or you're polluting the air and the climate, then that affects everything, including our natural areas. So it's a nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And there's ways of farming regeneratively that mean that it's not a trade-off. You don't have to accept a loss in habitat in order to gain in food production to some degree. So, if we give all of that upland across to habitat conservation or rewilding, then we potentially lose food production from those very large areas. Now, they might not produce a huge amount in volume, but that's some of our most nutrient-dense food. And it's the most resilient food source, because we can have animals running on for years if we need to. We can harvest them when we need. And in the times of climate change, when we've got more and more vulnerability in our arable areas and fragile kind of cropping systems, and less of the whole planet can produce crops reliably, and we're shrinking towards the parts of the world that are green and have a reliable rainfall, then just to give up on food production in these upland areas is, for me, a no-no. And ultimately, it leaves a vulnerability, because it then means that we've got to buy in that food production from somewhere, which is ghost acres, really. And at some point, if those other places that you're buying from can no longer produce food, then we are in a deficit position as well. That involved as well in the conversation around the fact that we've got an incredibly important rich cultural heritage in this country, in the uplands in particular, that yes, we've done things in a way that's degraded landscapes, but we can design better systems that can still, incorporate these amazing rich cultural heritage as well. So this integrated landscape map basically has these 3 tiers that integrate all 3 levels. So we identify areas that are really important for rare species and habitats, and we say we're accepting that there's a cost to it, but we're going to protect those. And we're identifying where those are. We're looking at areas that have been previously kind of modified or improved for agriculture and have kind of gone out of their natural state. And they're saying, look, we can do this agriculture much better. We can do it in ways that is hydrating the landscape. We can sequester carbon. We can increase biodiversity, and we can produce the most amazing nutrient-dense food that's really resilient and reliable. And then we can also have areas that are really hard to manage under more production level agricultural methods, and we can say, let's restore the peatlands, let's rewild the rivers, let's reintroduce keystone species, and let's connect up landscapes in a network so that we've got interconnectedness throughout that whole landscape. And if every farm and estate did that, we'd have something. We'd have a resilient food system, we'd have the wildlife, we'd have the interconnectedness, and we'd also have profitability in our farming and estate system. So we've got really good at how to do that with land managers. So in these bioregional projects, what we're now realising is that individual farmers are great, but it's very isolated. And what we really need is to start to layer people back into those landscapes. Like a big farm, on their own, could have a herd of a couple of hundred cattle or something, and it's enough to sustain them. But in order to start to see true agroecological kind of layers come back in, sort of horticulture, and then what we're calling wilder orchards. And we had a great conversation about this, Helen, didn't we? About this agroecological way of growing food that's messy but incredibly productive. That takes a lot of energy and people, which is usually beyond the scope of a kind of livestock farming system. But there's ways of creating opportunities so we can start to layer those jobs and opportunities back into those big landscapes. So we're really keen on developing that. And then we really want to start to work in networks of farmers together. So part of our bioregional work is going to be going into an area and trying to get funding and support the development of 15 or so farmers in that area who are all ready for a transition, and not just do a bit of basic training where they get taught grazing, but help them design their farming system with this integrated landscape design, and then work together with the other farms to see how, for instance, on commons, how can they work together to operate a common grazing system that's regenerative instead of everyone just competing against each other or conflicting. And then we start to really significantly impact landscapes and make a change. So we're on the farming side, that's what we're interested in doing, is starting to develop those network projects where we've now got some really deep expertise in how to help farms transition. And then separately, we've also realised that if you think about what's happened in some of the upland landscapes like the highlands, you've had the highland clearances. Essentially what's happened is you've gone from a diverse ownership of people, of subsistence farmers and small-scale farmers that have got a diverse range of animals and are producing food in place with that cultural, adaptation. And then the land ownership has been simplified, and at the same time, the way that they manage the land has been simplified in terms of just either sheep or selective grazers coming in at scale. So the sheep in the terms of highlands, and every upland landscape has some sort of similar pattern of simplification. So you get this kind of degradation that happens across the social ecosystem, as well as the actual natural ecosystem also degrades at the same time, and these things correlate. And it's because of what I just said. If you want to have a worked farming system, you need people. So what wilderculture is really about is to try to build back those layers. And that means that we have to start to work with more than just farmers. So we haven't started any actual cultural projects yet, but we want to be able to go into a bioregional area and work with the farming community, but also to start to go through what we call a rooting to place process, which is helping them to start understand that their landscape is so much more than what we see here today. Like, we've got a really low baseline on what a landscape should look like, and we've got competing ideas about what should happen, as we just discussed. So some people will be, it needs to just be sheep farming, it's always been sheep farming, and then other people will be, no, it needs to be wilder, and we used to have keystone species here. But if we go through a process of going right back in time to the kind of how it was formed geologically, right the way through all the different cultural shifts that happen, and we try and get as many of the community involved as we can in that. And it could be a series of talks, or we've got an actual structured process to go through that we teach this stuff. They start to see things from other people's perspectives, and they start to understand how their landscape has formed and changed. And then from that position of understanding that kind of deep-rooted essence of place, you can then start to design for the future, including and integrating some of those aspects. So our idea is to go in and try and work in the community in some way. It's going to be different in each place, to try and help them develop a bioregional plan that captures that essence of place in that really rooted way, and then to try and act as a conduit for grant funds to be able to kickstart projects in line with their bioregional plan from that long process of kind of really understanding place. And at the same time, we'll also have been working with the farms in that place. So in theory, we should have a range of farms that are ready for other people to come in and start to initiate projects like orchards, or any type of food projects, or it could be a local abattoir, or a farm shop van, or whatever the thing is. We would be looking at key projects that we could fund and support that could come in and help catalyse that change in that place, and help channel money back to a relocalisation of the economy in that place. So that's the big vision of our work in wilderculture, and how we see this is a kind of antithesis of globalization, isn't it? It's like people caring, people understanding and engaging with the local farmers, and actually starting to think about how they can grow food in place themselves.
I absolutely love it. It's so beautiful, and I'm so pleased that I started asking a little about that limitation of the corporate work, because it feels like just two stark contrasts. That complete understanding of why the pull is in this direction of something that's almost overwhelmingly complex and difficult to put into this little nutshell that you can package it up in, but beautiful because of that, and so expansive. And the work that you're doing already and that you have done with wilderculture, if you're working on a very large, essentially overall it's a large land area, you've got a lot of experience from that, so you're bringing in that experience, and then this vision is just continuing to expand it outwards. I love it. I think the aspect of this that shines through is the human health. It's about people and regenerating for people, not just this kind of, we need to reduce the carbon, but we need to regenerate on all those different layers, and re-recognizing the job roles and the value that comes from that. And then also I think there's something about the nutrition and kind of relearning food. I imagine that these projects allow for new foods to be on the menu that the globalization just wouldn't. We've lost diversity of food. Do you feel that that's a big thing that comes through?
It's a huge piece, and that's part of the challenge of my work, is there's so many aspects that all interweave. But one of my early projects was primal meats and primal living, and it's still a big passion of mine. It's so much beyond just your diet, obviously. But living primally is what I now refer to as regenerative living. So this this idea that health is about just, getting the right macronutrients. And also this whole new, if you're interested in the new biology movement, there's so much new science coming out around how humans work. Rachel's literally rewriting what we know about that, and the fact that it's so important that we're in natural light, and we need to earth and ground, there's so many different functions of our body that are related to being in nature, hearing the sounds, smelling things, the understanding of the microbiome, in terms of it's not just about the macronutrients in your food, it's about the phytonutrients that come from, having to be in connection with healthy soils. You don't get phytonutrients in plants unless those plants are grown in a healthy soil, and you've got an interchange of the microbes talking to the plants, and those phytonutrients then talk and provide food and signals to our gut, which is really the community that's in charge, that is us, and kickstarts a whole cascades of, hormonal effects and other well-being effects that are way beyond things that we can measure in that reductionist way that we've been thinking about health. So this has been a whole kind of unfolding world for me, is, yes, we need to have good regenerative food with a good, with a regenerative label on it. But isn't it even better to be partly growing your own food, and also, where you can't grow your food, buying, even if it's, not somebody that's choosing to go down the route of having a label on their food, a local farmer that you know and trust. You can see them farming in a way that's really good for biodiversity and soil health, and the farmers are healthy and happy, and that you can go and speak to that farmer, and you know that food is coming from them, it's local. That's the end point, isn't it? There's so much more there. And also adapting, the way that you live. So the part of where my husband's work and my work is interweaving is around the concept of regenerative living and settlement design. So we are using ourselves as an experiment on this whole topic, because it's a fairly new world. And we are trying to design on Lismore a future home, which is basically supportive of being able to live regeneratively. And that involves so he specialises in natural materials. So that is creating a house envelope that is healthy, doesn't emit gases, hasn't got, Wi-Fi and other potentially harmful, EMFs in there, has got natural floors so you can earth, has got structured water in the taps, natural lighting, breathable, all natural materials, so no off-gassing, and then insulated naturally and designed to live in a very simple way, not around a TV, natural fires, heating that's, coming from a source that's resilient and, wood or whatever, but hugely insulated and efficient. So really, really low cost living. So we've designed the house and we're working on that at the moment. And then you can't just live in a regenerative home and not be interconnected to the land, because it's holes within holes. So you have to be nested within a landscape where you're going to at least produce some food and lifestyle benefit. So we've got a 4-acre croft, and it's got a woodland that supplies our wood, obviously, and it's also just an amazing biodiverse native woodland. Then we've got willow in a coppice that will produce most of our firewood to heat the house. We've got our own spring, so we're resilient in terms of water supply, and of course we're not drinking chlorinated water. And we've got a food production system which is adapted in a system that's designed for us and how we want to live. So we want to be very flexible, because we go off sailing quite a lot. So we don't want an animal system. So we've designed a kind of wilder orchard, which produces a range of fruits and vegetables, perennial vegetables. And we can have a chicken unit that somebody could look after if we wanted to, that runs up and down. And we can produce quite a lot of our own food from that in a very kind of perennial way. That means that we're not having to do a lot of maintenance and looking after it. And we can walk away for a whole summer and the birds will just get extra fat that year. It's not all full birds. So, and then we've also got the sewage system from the house will be incorporated into being, be a vermiculture system or something that can be used on the land. So you've created an entire closed loop system. You're completely resilient in power and water, and and also you're just living in a way that's aligned with, the natural processes. And I've still got quite a bit of work to do in terms of getting my work. Like, I'm working on regenerative projects, but I'm spending too much time in front of a computer and I'm driving too much. So the next big shift is, how do I get my work life in balance so that I'm not sitting in front of a digital screen all of the time and, getting fatter and fatter because I'm not out on the land working. So the next big phase is trying to get to the point where I can maybe get my work down to 6 hours a day, and a few visits packaged up to the farms, and then be on the croft and be able to do things in a different way. So that's the kind of the big regenerative vision for our life. So I guess that's a very long answer, like you'll always get from me, in response to, is it just about good regenerative nutrition? Well, it's so much more, isn't it? That what makes a healthy human? We've drifted a very long way away in modern society from what builds a healthy human. So yeah, I'm, like I say, we're doing this experiment on how can I rebuild myself into the regenerative model of living.
It's really inspirational. It's really a wonderful vision that I could kind of go, oh yes, please, I could step into that right away. I think a lot of people would love it. It's like paradise, connecting to the land and that health of the building and all those different things that you're bringing into it. It's a dream for so many. I know that it wouldn't suit everybody, and a lot of people are so happy with their technology and their fast pace of life, and we we need that diversity too. But I can also see how living like that it's teaching us, isn't it? It's that idea of how does nature work that you kind of brought in earlier on. And well, a lot of that is that discovery through just connecting and moving in that direction and learning. It's really can see how the work that you're doing is this expression of who you are. It's not just a job, it's so much more, and it keeps kind of expanding out of you in all of these different directions. And thank you so much for sharing this time with us. And I think if you could maybe offer to people, if they are resonating, like not kind of just listening and thinking, oh well, I might like to change but I don't know how, but actually really resonating with this, what would you advise to people that, I think even beyond farmers, people that are thinking, I would love to kind of reconnect to place? Which elements of your work would you kind of guide them to, direct them to, and how would you advise them to step forward?
Well, we are developing, as part of Wilderculture, a community platform where it's going to be Wilderculture. The whole point is we're trying to help citizens become part of a culture that's supportive of this future. So very soon we'll have a free community platform where we can start. We'll have a whole range of free courses at the basic level. There will be a membership option to go through. We're developing a Routing to Place for Citizens program, where people can go through that process that I talked about, right back into geological time, right the way through, as part of a understanding your place, but also more than that, it's a part of a self-development process of really, finding your niche in the ecosystem, learning to live in your landscape in a much more rooted, deep way, and engaging in regeneration in your local community. So we're really excited to launch that. So very shortly, on the website wilderculture.com, there'll be a way of signing up to that. There's a sign up there at the moment, but it's we're rebuilding all of the website to reflect this new kind of phase of our work around the bioregionalism. So it's not quite there yet. But that would be the place, I think. Really excited to start to engage with citizens as well as our work with farmers. So I'd be really keen for anybody to join us there.
Sounds fantastic. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check the description for the links to learn more and engage with the work from Caroline and her many ventures. There's also the additional We Are Carbon conversation with Caroline that you'll find there, and a link to our special 14-minute compilation, Carbon Builds Life. featuring Caroline alongside Deanna Denker and Peter Bick. It's a great introduction to the themes that we explore with We Are Carbon, and is a nice compact piece to share with friends. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date. I'm Helen Fisher. This is We Are Carbon, and let's keep figuring this all out together.